Hey guys, it's Dani. Today we are talking about one of the most beautiful orchids that I've ever seen, the amazing Rhynchostylis coelestis variety blue. And if you're a bit older on my channel, I think you already know that I absolutely love this orchid. I have been dying to own it ever since I started my YouTube channel. I actually did have a coelestis blue in the very same year when I started my channel. It was among the first things that I ordered from Schroeder back in the day. I am so incredibly in love with tiny little flowers, clusters. I think I like them better than big fluffy flowers, but anyway. Sadly though, with my original Rhynchostylis, I didn't have such good luck. So I've been left with the dream of owning one and seeing one in person in bloom ever since for quite a lot of years. And I had to wait a lot to get a fully mature one. And I did this year, and she already bloomed. So today we're gonna talk about it, make a little video dedicated to this orchid. We didn't do this in a long time. I will tell you about the little quirks of this orchid, give you close-ups, and even touch base with some care requirements. Now, the Rhynchostylis is, as you might expect, a vivacious orchid, but unlike other vanda orchids, such as the Pacharas or the Denisonianas, you can see it looks a little bit different. And yes, it is actually a very short vanda. I would say that it is about maybe 30 centimeters in height. Let me just place my hand here so you have some sort of context here. From the root system all the way to the top, roughly 30 centimeters. This is not a tall vanda, and even though it can actually grow taller than this, it will not do so anytime soon. Rhynchostylis orchids grow very slow in comparison to vanda orchids. And you might know vandas do grow slow. Well, imagine these guys grow even slower. Also, the shape of this vanda, and I'm just going to turn it around so you see better, is reminiscent of a palm tree, at least in my eyes. You can see the leaves are placed side to side, just like any other vanda, but they point downwards, and this reduces actually the leaf span. So one leaf can be, again, about 30 centimeters long, but being that it points downwards, and it's a little bit hard to see because it leans on this basket, it can actually be 20 centimeters in width simply due to its shape. So short in height and relatively short in width means that it is a very good candidate for tiny places. If you grow your orchids on a shelf, so not hanging like I do, this is a really good candidate because you're more prone to having issues with the height of the shelf rather than with the width in many cases. So being that it's not a very tall orchid makes it really proper for shelf displays in case you don't want to keep it hanging. But this is not the only reason why it's such an appropriate orchid for home growing generally. The Rhynchostylis coelestis is actually one of the parents of the Rhynchorydes Bangkok Sunset, which again you might know as being one of my crown jewel orchids in my entire collection. You'll have some footage on the screen. I think you can see the resemblance between the coelestis and the Bangkok Sunset. I will give you close-ups of the coelestis as well, but flower-wise it is actually very similar, and we will make more cross-references with the flowers in a little bit when we get to them, but I hope you can see a bit of a resemblance between the Rhynchostylis coelestis and the Rhynchorydes. This orchid passes on the gene of being quite tiny and quite short. Now, don't imagine this orchid will forever be short. Of course it will grow, but it does have very slow growth. In my opinion, as I was saying, slower than vanda orchids or most vanda orchids. So I would not worry that something like this will just reach the ceiling within 5 years or so. Maybe in 5 years it will double its size, and this is just speculation. So for an orchid in 5 years to double its size, you know, it doesn't grow all that fast. Another appealing thing about this orchid is its proneness to produce keikis. Now, you know me, I'm not a fan of keikis typically, but this aspect depends on the orchid. Usually with monopodial orchids, I love basal keikis. Well, the same can be said about vanda orchids, and the Rhynchostylis coelestis, maybe the other ones as well, are very prone to producing basal keikis. As a general rule, vanda orchids do not produce spike keikis I'm not sure if there are any species which don't apply to this rule, so I'm not gonna say no Vanda orchid produces keikis, but generally the ones that I have the pleasure to own do not produce keikis. I've never heard of one producing a spike keiki. They all produce basal keikis. Some of them are more prone than others. When it comes to Rhynchostylis, you can see I already have 3 keikis which are visible. This one, which is in bloom, another tinier one in the back, and the main mother plant here, and somewhere underneath there's another very tiny one which is hard to see at this point. And of course, keikis mean a bushier orchid and also more flower spikes. Thus, I have 4 flower spikes on this orchid instead of 1 or 2, because another nice feature about this plant is that it is prone to producing 2 flower spikes, or even 3, or in some cases even 4 per stem. I have 2 on the main plant, on the mother plant, and another 2 in the back from the keiki. This keiki is too tiny to produce flowers just yet. Next year, I believe it will be mature, and you can imagine I will have even more flower spikes. So let me just give you a close-up so you can see the mother plant better. And there we go. This is the actual mother plant. You can see there that we have the tiny keiki sprouting from one of its sides, and in the back we have the second keikis, which is again a basal keiki, and on the other side there is another very tiny one, very hard to film. Anyway, that one is way too small, and if you can notice, this is actually the very first time this orchid blooms. It is her very first flowering, meaning it is actually a younger plant. Well, that's a stretch. Rhynchostylis orchids grow so slow that from a seedling to this size, I'm gonna speculate it's gonna take about 7 to 10 years to reach this. If you are more knowledgeable, do correct me down below in the comment section, but I don't think I'm very far away. If it's not 7 years, it's 5 years, although I doubt it. Definitely these orchids can bloom at a smaller size. You can see the mother plant is actually a little bigger than the keiki. This keiki was produced by the mother plant when she was very, very young, and even so, the mother plant didn't really bloom until now. So this orchid can bloom when it has maybe about 20 centimeters in height, but it's a tricky thing to speculate, because if we look at this little keiki here, which is maybe not 20 centimeters in height, maybe 17, he is not ready yet. So the slow growth can be a good thing and a bad thing. If you decide to purchase a seedling of this orchid, I think you do have quite a while to wait. Again, if any of you have experience with a seedling that you've grown until it reached maturity, do let us know down below how many years it took. One more aspect that differentiates Rhynchostylis from other Vandas is the root production. Typically, Rhynchostylis orchids and even their hybrids do not produce as many roots as Vandas. And you can see here I do have quite a lot of roots, but the thing is, they grow super slow. It will take quite a bit of time for the roots to grow. In my opinion, they do grow slower than Vanda orchids, and even if this orchid can produce massive roots and they can become very, very long, it usually does take a little more than Vandas. Also, having experience with my Rhynchorydes, these roots don't grow all the time. You can have Vanda orchids which have growing root tips pretty much all the time. They can take a little break when they're in bloom and then start again. With these orchids, I noticed that growth is not all that vigorous. But now let us talk a little bit about the flowers too. On my viewfinder on the camera, it appears the flowers are quite blue. Well, in reality, they're not all this blue. They're quite a lot more purple than this. However, they're not as purple as the Pachara or other so-called blue orchids. I do believe this orchid is very close to blue. It does have a very dark blue purple indigo on the lip, and also the flowers do have this wonderful tint of blue on the edges of the petals and sepals, but it's really not ink blue. I would not expect that. It's very rare to have an orchid that is proper blue. Most of them do have a red pigment due to the anthocyanin or purple pigment. So the shade is really a sort of indigo purple, but I would go ahead and say it's really close to blue. Now, considering the name this orchid has, coelestis, to me it inspires blue skies, because the word celeste, which has to do with the stars, with the sky, does appear to be chosen due to the color of this orchid. This is a species, in case I didn't mention, it's not man-made, it's not obtained. This is what we call a botanical orchid, meaning we would find it like this in nature as well. However, this does not mean that this particular individual or other individuals we find for sale are obtained from nature. They're not. This orchid can easily be propagated in cultivation through seed, and not only through cloning, through keikis. There are many ways to propagate these orchids, and I really doubt we have any well-selected orchids in cultivation, and we shouldn't. But the fact that this is a botanical orchid makes it even more spectacular because it's natural discoloration. However, it is not the only variety we can find available. There is also a pink variety which looks the same, acts the same, has the same pattern, but instead of having this blue-purple, it actually has a really nice magenta pink, which is absolutely amazing as well, and I'm seriously thinking of purchasing that one as well. It just appears to be a little bit rarer to find than this one, at a mature stage at least. And I really wanted the blue variety. Now that I have it, I will focus on the pink one as well. And not only the flowers are really beautiful on this orchid, they're also fragrant. Now, to me, it smells exactly or almost identical to the Rhynchostylis Bangkok Sunset, but of course, not many of you have this orchid, so I can describe it as very subtle, very flowery and fresh, reminds me of spring flowers. It is not overly sweet or overly in any way. It smells like spring flowers, if that can resonate it to something. Field flowers, grassy, very green. That's how I would describe it. It's not like a perfume that you would wear like other orchids make you think. It's not obnoxious in any way. It's not super powerful either. It's quite subtle. Being this close to the orchid, I can definitely sense it. It is a daytime fragrance orchid. It releases its fragrance when it's warm, when it's sunny, and it's just a beautiful waft of spring fresh air. That's how I would describe it. Now, there is another thing to note here. If you noticed how the display looks like, these flower spikes are not 100% vertical. It would have to be like this. They do lean towards the light, but do you notice they're not pendant? I do believe this is the only species in this genus which does not have pendant blooms. Other Rhynchostylis, all of them have pendant displays. The Retusa or Retusha actually has very long pendant bloom displays. So this one appears to be the only one with pretty vertical or upright displays, which is absolutely fantastic. I do enjoy this display as well, because it is very showy. Typically, I do go for the pendant display, but I don't mind this at all. And you can imagine, the more flower spikes you have, the better the display will be. Now, the flowers, as you can see, they're not all open, that's one. And second, they're not all positioned correctly. And while this doesn't matter all that much for aesthetic reasons, you can see some flowers are upright while others didn't fully rotate, and this is because the cluster is just so tight, they have no actual space to rotate. So whoever had space to rotate, they did. Whoever didn't. It might just be a trait of the individual, of the variety, or maybe the conditions outside. This is the first blooming, so I'm not really sure if this will change or will improve in the future. But yeah, you can see here where there was more space, the flowers actually rotated. However, towards the top, it didn't happen all that much, which I think I would prefer if everybody was rotated, but it's okay. Now, I told you I would make a little comparison between the Rhynchostylis and the Rhynchostylis flower-wise. They do smell very similar, but flower-wise, they do appear to be very similar as well. The Rhynchostylis obviously has different colors. On the petals and sepals, we have orange, purple, yellow. Everything kind of fades into the other color. Very similar to how this flower looks like. We have a more pronounced color on the edges with the Rhynchostylis Bangkok Sunset as well. Shape-wise, I think they're identical. I think size-wise, they are identical as well. I do believe that the Sunset has a wider lip. You can see on the coelestis, the lip is pointing upwards a little bit. This might actually be a trait of this particular individual, so I'm not gonna say it's a difference with all the individuals, but yeah, that one is a little bit more opened. I wish this one was a little bit more open too, but it's okay. This abundance of flowers actually takes away from the individual details. So when you look at the orchid, you see everything. You don't really notice each flower individually, which I know is a letdown for some people. For me, it's not. I still see abundance. And to wrap this video up, care-wise, there are some differences between Rhynchostylis generally and other Vendaceous orchids, in the sense that these orchids really don't need all that much sun, all that much direct sun. Actually, I mean to say, they are still highlight orchids, maybe Cattleya light, but in the intense scorching sun, really I would not place these orchids in the direct path of the rays. I would keep them sheltered. They do seem to do perfectly fine with less direct sunshine. If you can place them somewhere where they get very bright shade, or you can filter the sun through a sheer curtain or a shade cloth, depending on environment. I don't get away with the shade cloth, I need proper shade, then everything should be okay. I kept this orchid outside this summer, and she received direct sunshine early in the morning until 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and then in the late afternoon. In between, it had just indirect sunshine. Being that I am in a Mediterranean country, buildings are very light colored, they're beige, they're white, so the sun reflects from everywhere. This orchid really did have bright light, but not direct sunshine, and that appears to have done the trick. The previous owner of this orchid said their Rhynchostylis didn't actually bloom until now, and this orchid, you can see, it's quite large and it is blooming for the very first time. So heat and bright light definitely play a role for this orchid as well. I just believe they're somewhat lower light lovers when compared to the other Vandas. Other than that, these orchids do receive the same care as my other Vandas. Check the video down below in the description. I do have a tutorial for Vandas, and it includes watering, it includes fertilizer and everything. I don't actually do anything different with this orchid. I do use the same type of fertilizer. They're rather heavier feeders when you compare them to oncidiums, for example, but I really don't overdo it with Vandas. For me, they grow better in a basket. I don't seem to have as much success with them potted, or potted the way I would like them to be potted, and it's simply just easier for me to use baskets. They do have a liner, and if you missed that video, check it down below. I'll add it in the description. In my summer months, I really appreciate having a liner, retaining that water for a few extra hours in a day, because it just gets so hot that water simply evaporates in a few minutes. And this orchid is a drinker. She drinks a lot of water. And this is her current location. As I was saying, I still keep my Vanda orchids outside. The difference is now in the daytime, I can definitely keep them in the sun for a few hours in the first part of the day. I still don't keep them in the sun in the second part of the day because they can still burn. But even with 11 or 10 degrees Celsius in the nighttime, I still seem to be okay with them outside. So alrighty guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and you know the drill. Like or dislike this video below, subscribe to my channel for regular videos, tutorials, and other fun orchid subjects. And if you like YouTube to notify you whenever I upload a new video, just turn on notifications for my channel. Also, if you want to know more about my other setups, again, just expand the description. I do have everything listed there. And with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!